Hello everyone, Inquisitor Vaughn here, and in today's video I wanted to answer the question how to make a Necron homebrew dynasty. Someone asked me that in my comments a few days ago and I said I would make a video about it, so this is the video that I'm going to make. I'm pretty sure it would help other people in the community as well, especially since the Necrons are getting a lot of attention from Games Workshop right now. Just a warning, this video is guided but unscripted. And the reason why is because if I were to take time and write the script, it would take more time to produce the video. And because I want to become more consistent with producing content for the channel, I'm going to try a more unscripted approach because, writing scripts takes a long time, especially for longer videos. And so if you like this format more than you like my scripted videos, or you like it just as much, let me know in the comments below and that'll let me know to continue doing this kind of content. But without delay, let's get into how to make your own Necron dynasty. So, as with any faction in the Warhammer 40k universe, if you want to create your own homebrew, all you really need to do is to pick a color scheme and pick a name. After that, you could just start playing games and make your own history, right? But the Necrons are, at least in the lore, one of the oldest factions in the setting. And so if you want to put a little extra effort into making your own homebrew dynasty, which is something that I always recommend for any faction, I always recommend that people do their own research and make their own story on the tabletop, because I think that's what will keep you in the hobby regardless of the changes to, the rules, right? If you want to do a little bit extra for your Necron dynasty, there are some things that I think that you should consider, and we're going to get into it now. The first thing that I think you should think about is whether or not your dynasty is loyal to the Triarch. And when I say loyal to the Triarch, I don't mean loyal to Zarek. I mean loyal to the Triarch as an institution. Because when you figure out whether or not your dynasty is loyal, that's like half the history. If we look at Necron history, there's a lot of infighting, and a lot of the infighting happens because there's disagreements over the rule of the Triarch. Necron history can be divided into certain sections. The expansion, when they left the Necron homeworld in search of other places to live. The first wars of succession, in which, the Necrons started fighting each other because they had expanded so far from the Necron homeworld. They were like, why do we need to be under the Triarch's rule? And so they started fighting each other. And then came the old ones, the emergence of the old ones, then came fighting with the old ones, and the old ones beating the Necron tier back to their homeworld. And then on their homeworld for like 1,000 years, they were fighting each other again. The second wars of succession, right? So a lot of this infighting happened because of their attitude and opinions about the Triarch. And so when you're making your homebrew dynasty, I think you should think about whether or not this dynasty was loyal to the Triarch, and if they still are. The spicy part of the Necron lore that kind of changes things and makes it interesting whether or not they were loyal is the part where to unite the Necron tier people, the Silent King at the time declared war on the old ones. And by doing so, he declared a pardon on the secessionist dynasties. So those who stood against the Triarch were secessionists, right? And he declared a pardon for them so that they can join the Necron tier as a force and they could all fight together, right? That's another tactic that the Necron tier nobles use. They say, hey, if we need to come together and we need to stop this infighting, we just need to get together and fight someone else, right? But at that time, when they declared war on the old ones, there was a pardon. And so those who stood against the Triarch were forgiven, right? And then after they are beaten back to their homeworld, they start fighting again. So it's likely that those who were given a pardon started to show their tendencies again and, began fighting the Triarch again. And then after that, shortly after that, became Zarek's rule. And after Zarek's rule came biotransference. And so at that point, the Necrons didn't have a choice in whether or not they were loyal. They were forced to be loyal due to the programs of biotransference. The reason why I'm saying all of this is that it can determine how your Necron dynasty is now, because after the Great Sleep, because Zarek took the command protocols away from the Necron legions, they now have free will. And so a lot of them will take the stance that they had before they were forced into loyalty through biotransference. This is the more historical aspect of doing research for your homebrew, but basically there are examples of this in the established dynasties as well. The biggest example would be the Nectist dynasty. They were considered barbarians amongst the other Necron tier because they refused to follow the edicts of the Triarch, even before biotransference, right? Now, they're one of the dynasties that got a pardon, and fought along with the rest of the Necron tier against the old ones. And then biotransference happened, and so they were loyal by force. But after biotransference, after the Great Sleep, after the Great Awakening, they became the same kind of Necrons that they were as Necrons here. They are considered barbarians amongst the other Necrons because they just refuse to follow the Silent King's edict. By figuring out whether or not your dynasty was loyal to the Triarch, you also figure out if your dynasty was one of the older Necron dynasties or one of the younger Necron dynasties. By older or younger, I mean, were they one of the original Necron tier houses that expanded from the Necron tier homeworld? And there are a few examples of this in the lore where there's a dynasty that was a offshoot of a previous dynasty. One of the biggest examples of this is the Subakar dynasty and the Charnovac dynasty. Because of the shared history that they have, we could tell that they were at one time the same dynasty, and a few of their leaders are related by bloodline, right? But at a certain point, there was a schism between the dynasty, and they became the Subakar and the Charnovac. Another example of this is hypothetically the Novak dynasty, because the Novak dynasty, their history doesn't say it explicitly, but by their wars of conquest, it suggests that they were once a previous dynasty, and they split and they did their own thing, and they fought against the previous dynasty during the Wars of Secession. And I talk about this in the Necron Deep Dives, right? So I'm saying, were they one of the older dynasties that was one of the original Necron tier houses, or were they a product of schism due to disloyalty? The easiest route, if you do want to make your own lore, but you want to, choose the easier route, is to say that they were loyal, right? They were loyal and they were one of the original houses. Or they were loyal and they were product of a divide in their original dynasty, but they stayed loyal. The reason why it would be easier to say that they were loyal is because by saying that they were loyal, that means they survived all of the conflicts of the Necron history, and your lore is pretty much done, right? They were cooperative and they survived throughout each point of history in the Necron history, right? That's the easiest route to go. For example, my homebrew dynasty, the Synoptic dynasty, were always loyal to the Triarch. They were one of the original houses, but they were just a smaller, weaker house, but they were always loyal to the Triarch. And therefore, most of my homebrew's history is pretty much done. All right. So decide whether or not they were loyal to the Triarch, decide whether or not they're one of the original houses or whether they were a product of a schism, and then figure out some more things. The next thing that I think you should do if you are creating a homebrew dynasty is to pick your favorite Necron unit and build your lore and army around that unit. For example, if you like Lichguard, the role of Lichguard is to protect their lords. So it could be Lord, Overlord, Pharaon, etc. But that's their role. And if you really like Lichguard, you can create a dynasty's lore based on the fact that you like Lichguard. For example, they can be a dynasty that was hired specifically by the Silent King to protect his nobles, or to be a vassal dynasty where they protect key locations of the Necron dynasty or something of that nature. If you like canoptic scarabs, and who doesn't like canoptic scarabs? They're cute, they're adorable, they're little, just get a bunch of canoptic scarabs and then make a story around why this dynasty has so many canoptic scarabs. Like, for example, my Ogdebek Pharaon's name is Zeraphazd, and one of his names is the Skittering Lord. He's called the Skittering Lord because he uses a tide of canoptic scarabs as the initial assault to his attack, right? And so you can pick a favorite unit that you have or a favorite model, for example. If you like the Chronomancer, you can create a legion that is centered around a Chronomancer as their leader or something of that nature, right? Pick a favorite unit and then make a story for your entire dynasty based on the role of that unit or model. Another example of me doing this is of my Homebrew Dynasty, the Synoptic Dynasty. I really like destroyer units, right? But I wanted something that was separate from my Ogdebek Dynasty Legion. My Ogdebek are all shooters because of their weapon specialization. To me, my Ogdebek, my army is full of shooting, long range, short range firepower, right? But my Synoptic, I like destroyer units, and so they are an army of destroyers, and that's just because I like the destroyer models. I think that both the old and the new destroyer models are just amazing, and so they are literally just a dynasty of destroyers because I like the destroyer models. And luckily for me, in this edition, they actually have what the Annihilation Legion, I believe it's called, where it's a detachment focused on giving buffs to destroyer units. If you want to do a legion that is more focused on its own royal court, you can have a bunch of nobles and a bunch of elite units to support that list or that army. And it could just be based on the fact that you like these models and you want to see it and you want to build a story around it. The third or fourth, depending on how you interpret the first tip that I gave you, tip is to pick 1 to 2 of your favorite colors. Now, Necrodermis by itself, the standard color of Necrodermis is silver, right? But beyond that, it can be any color you want it to be. It could be metallic, it could be non-metallic, it could be neon, it could be anything. Pick your favorite colors, because I think one of the most important things about building an army and making your own lore is that you like your own color scheme. And if it's your favorite color, then you're going to be a little bit more motivated to build your army, to be invested in the games, to be proud of your army, and to continue their story. So pick 1 to 2 of your favorite colors, combine them. It doesn't have to make sense. It doesn't have to be like neat and color coordinated. It could be an eyesore if you want it to be. Just have fun with it. Use your own favorite colors. Make it something that you would like to look upon when you're playing games, and just, invest that into your army. If I were to give one more tip or one more piece of advice about creating your homebrew dynasty, it would be to pick an enemy. Right now, depending on the history of your own dynasty, you can pick one of the old one races to do it. Like, you can pick the orcs or the eldar, the slan, the quark, the old ones themselves, like the actual leaders. Or you can be one of the dynasties that has modern enemies, like the Tyranids or humanity, or any other, the Votan. You can pick your enemy, but pick an enemy and make your dynasty's history about that enemy in some way, and make their current storyline about that enemy. Make them like a nemesis to that, or a chosen enemy to that faction. For example, my Synoptic dynasty, they have serious beef against the Slan, and it's the Slan that destroyed their tomb worlds, and that's why they have beef with them, and it's on site, right? So if you pick a enemy, then the rest of your Necron history is pretty much done, right? You have the past, you have the color scheme, you have a story behind the color scheme, and then you have an enemy, and you are done. That's really just it. And then from there, from this point, where you've collected all this information and you have this history and this information, make it so that every game that you play on the tabletop adds to the history. That's something that I like to do with my wargaming, and it's something that I've been doing since I got started in playing Warhammer 40k in like 8th edition or slightly before 8th edition. All of my battles are interconnected into a storyline, meaning my Ogdebek army has a history spanning back all the way to the 8th edition, Necron Codex. So once you have all this information, make it so that every game that you play adds to your dynasty's history. And I'm telling you, this will keep you invested in your army, in your hobby, in the hobby, in the community, and it will keep you eager to play games. Because once you make your own thing, you want to make your own name. You want to carve your dynasty's name into the history of the community. Definitely take pictures of your army, play games, do little like storytelling things when you're not playing games, just to push the narrative forward or make a game make sense, and just go all in. So that's pretty much it. Determine whether or not they were always loyal to the Triarch, and if they are loyal now. Determine if they were one of the original Necrontyr houses, or if they were one of the houses made from Schism and Succession. Pick your favorite Necron unit and build a whole story around why your dynasty focuses on that unit. Pick 1 to 2 of your favorite colors and make that their heraldic color scheme. And then pick an enemy, whether it be orcs, Eldar, or Tyranids, etc. Just pick an enemy. And once you have those things, you're pretty much done with creating your own homebrew dynasty. Now, creating a name is an interesting thing. A lot of times it's just a conglomeration of, sounds, really. Like, for example, the Synoptic Dynasty, I got the name because of the word sin, because that means wrongdoing, and my dynasty is basically based on the annihilation of life. Their Ankh is basically like a horned Ankh. Like, they're basically based on the idea of evil, right? And so when you're creating a name for your dynasty, you could just make up a name and then add some technologically sounding ending, like tech or ak, or like something of that nature. But there's no clear cut way of creating a dynasty name, and in fact, you don't even need to create a Necron name. You can actually create a name for your dynasty where it's the Imperium giving the dynasty a name, and that's what they are known by. For example, you can have something called the Red Dynasty, and that's of course not what they call themselves, but it's what the Imperium calls them because they have red carapace and they've been fighting against a specific group of the Imperium, So when it comes to picking a name, you don't always have to go by the Necron approach. You can also do an Imperial approach. Another reason why that would also make sense is because a lot of the tomb worlds that Necrons have in the current setting were named not by Necrons, but by the Imperium. And this is because the Imperium settled on these worlds not knowing that they were tomb worlds, right? So, like, for example, Tamar, which is one of the Ogdebek tomb worlds, wasn't named by the Ogdebek dynasty. It was named by humanity. It was named by the Imperium. They just didn't know it was a tomb world. And now that world is called Tamar. The Necrons probably have another name for it, but we don't know that. And so you don't always have to go with a Necron name, a Necron approach. You can also choose an Imperial or another Xenos species giving them a name as well. Last but not least, you actually don't need to create a homebrew, right? I love when people create homebrews, but it's a lot of work and it can become a lot. And so you don't actually have to 100% create your own homebrew. You can just use an established dynasty and create your own story with your army or with your dynasty through that established history. It's possible too, if you want to create your own thing, you can use what's already established and just continue and participate and make your own story within that. There are many Necron dynasties to choose from that are established and that have a relatively good amount of history. that you can choose from, so that you don't have to do all the heavy lifting. All you have to do is just continue on with the lineage and continue on with the history using your army. You can create a warlord of a dynasty and its own little force, but you have the established history to lean on. Like, for example, if you want to, if you like the color blue and you like the idea of fighting Tyranids, but you also like the idea of an army of Necrons or a dynasty of Necrons that's mostly self-aware, meaning they have immortals and Lich Guard and things of that nature, but not a lot of warriors, choose the Charnavok dynasty. If you like the Silent King, of course, you like the color scheme. If you like the idea of playing the head honchos and the lead dynasty, the poster boy legion, definitely play the Zarekan dynasty. If you like the idea of wealthy Necrons, if you like the idea of Necrons who show their wealth and have, the visual appearance of wealth in their history is based on the accumulation of wealth, then why not play the Nihilek dynasty? If you like, you know, straightforward militaristic legion, then you should play the Sautek dynasty. If you like close combat Necrons who literally like to cover themselves in the blood of their enemy, and when it happens they get even more crazier, why not play the Novak dynasty? If you like the idea of blowing up people's stars, then you should play the Mefrit dynasty. If you like the idea of a dynasty that refuses to follow the edict of the Triarch, then play the Nekthist dynasty. If you like the idea of teleporting Necrons that teleport, they turn into light and they teleport across the battlefield and that's an extra move type thing, then why not play the Nefrek dynasty? If you like the idea of pirates Necrons with white armor, then play the Sarnak dynasty. If you like blue a little bit more than you would if you were playing the Charnavok dynasty, if you want an extremely powerful dynasty that doesn't have a lot of history, but their tomb world is known as the Cradle of War, then why not play the Thakht dynasty? If you like the idea of canoptic scarabs and canoptic tools and canoptic weaponry, and you also have a thing for copper, why not play the Ogdebek dynasty? There's a list of established dynasties that you could play. And you don't really have to create all the history. You can let the people who have came before you do the heavy lifting. There are a bunch of other dynasties as well, just based off of the color scheme. There are a lot of vassal dynasties. Like, for example, if you like militaristic Necrons, but you don't want to do Sautek, why not do the Menarch dynasty? They have a heavy history in the Warhammer 40k lore. Or for example, if you like the Sautek dynasty, you like the militaristic attitude, but you don't like the silver scheme, how about the Sekemtar? They have a black and red scheme, So do your research, look for dynasties that have established lore, and look through it first before you decide to make your own homebrew, right? But if you decide to make your own homebrew, all the power to you. I can't wait to see it. Hopefully, like, we're in the same Facebook groups and I can see your work. There's a Necron group that I'm a part of. I think it's called Warhammer 40k Necrons. If you are in that group, definitely share. And that's another thing. Please share your hobby, share your painting, share your miniatures, share your lore, because this is what the hobby community is about. All right. So those are my tips, my pieces of advice for creating a homebrew. And without anything else to be said, Inquisitor Vaughn out. Remember, the Emperor protects, the future is successor, and glory to Anathrosis.